He could afford it. That's the part nobody believes. 3 years of looking at the same sedan in the driveway, same color, same quiet hum pulling out of the same garage every morning. Meanwhile, his income had doubled, his neighborhood had shifted, and the street outside his house had slowly turned into a lineup of chrome grills and elevated ride heights. His colleagues drove things that announced them before they even stepped out. And he would pull into the office parking lot, low, sleek, unhurried, and something about that never bothered him the way it was supposed to. People assumed it was a phase. It wasn't the phase. And here's what makes that worth paying attention to. Because in a world built almost entirely around the idea that wanting more is just human nature, a person who genuinely, peacefully, repeatedly chooses not to escalate, that person is telling you something. Not loudly. They're not making a speech about minimalism or sending a message. They're just living in a way that most people find quietly unsettling, because it holds up a mirror. It asks, why do you need the bigger thing? Not accusingly, just by existing. There's a concept in psychology around what's called identity stability. This idea that some people have an internal sense of self so anchored that external markers of progress simply stop pulling on them the way they pull on everyone else. Status upgrades lose their gravity. The social ladder becomes something they can see clearly, stand next to, and simply not climb without feeling left behind. Most of us have met someone like this. What we rarely do is understand them, because understanding them means asking an uncomfortable question about ourselves, about how much of what we actually want, and how much of it is just the natural result of watching everyone around us want it first. If this is already making you think about someone you know, or maybe yourself, you're probably the kind of person this channel was made for. Subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of thinking coming. Here's something worth considering. Status has never really been about objects. Objects are just the current language it speaks. A few decades ago, the language was different. It was the cut of a suit, the neighborhood you mentioned casually in conversation, the school name you let slip without seeming to try. The specific thing always changes. What never changes is the underlying mechanic, the silent, constant human need to signal, I am doing well, I belong here, I have moved forward. And the SUV, in this particular moment in history, has become one of the loudest sentences in that language. Taller, wider, more commanding from behind a windshield. It doesn't just transport you, it positions you. And most people, without ever consciously deciding to, absorb that positioning as part of the point. They want to feel elevated. Literally. There's something psychologically loaded about sitting higher than traffic, looking down at the road rather than across it. It triggers something old in us, something about height and authority and being seen. But this is where it gets interesting. Because the sedan owner understands all of this, they're not naive to it. They've felt that pull. Everyone has. They've sat in a showroom. They've taken the test drive. They know what the elevated seat height does to your shoulders, your posture, your mood in traffic. They just decided that feeling wasn't worth building an identity around. And that distinction between noticing a feeling and letting it make decisions for you is quietly one of the most significant gaps between people. Not intelligence, not success, just the ability to observe your own desires from a slight distance without being dragged forward by them automatically. Most people never develop that gap. They just keep climbing and call it growth. There's a certain kind of person who, when their life gets complicated, doesn't add things. They remove them. They just quietly stop carrying weight that was never really theirs to carry. They leave the group chat on mute. They stop attending the dinner that always leaves them feeling somehow less than when they arrived. They keep the car that asks nothing of them socially and gives everything back mechanically. And from the outside, this looks like withdrawal, like settling, like someone slowly shrinking their world. But that's not what's happening at all. What's actually happening is a kind of editing, a deliberate, ongoing process of cutting away everything that only exists to be seen and keeping only what actually functions, what actually fits, what actually belongs to them, rather than to the version of them other people are comfortable with. Psychologists sometimes talk about the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, the gap between doing something because it signals value to others versus doing it because it generates meaning for yourself. And what's fascinating is that most people live almost entirely in the extrinsic lane without realizing it. The upgrade happens because the upgrade is visible. The new car matters because other people will register it. Even the feeling of achievement is, underneath, partly the anticipation of being witnessed achieving. Strip away the audience, and half the desire disappears. The sedan owner has, somewhere along the way, stripped away the audience. Not from loneliness, not from indifference to people, but from a growing disinterest in performing for them. There's a freedom buried inside that. Quiet, almost invisible, but completely load-bearing. It holds up a lot of the rest of their life. And once you see it in the car choice, you start seeing it everywhere else too. So here's the question this was always building toward. Not about sedans, not about SUVs, not even really about cars at all. The question is this: how much of what you're currently chasing actually belongs to you? How much of your next move, your next upgrade, your next version of a bigger and more visible life came from inside you? And how much of it arrived quietly, through years of watching other people want things, until their wanting became so familiar it started to feel like yours? This is one of the strangest features of being human. We absorb desire the way we absorb language. Early, unconsciously, fluently. By the time we're old enough to examine what we want, we've already been speaking someone else's vocabulary for decades. And the upgrades keep coming, and we keep accepting them, not because each one genuinely moves us closer to something meaningful, but because stopping feels more suspicious than continuing. Staying put looks like giving up. Keeping the sedan looks like falling behind. But there are people, not many, but they exist, who found a different relationship with forward, who understand that growth without direction is just movement, that bigger isn't always closer, that the most important things in a person's life rarely announce themselves from an elevated ride height, and they drive what they drive. They live how they live, not as a statement, not as a philosophy they need you to validate, just as a quiet, daily answer to a question most people are still afraid to ask themselves. The sedan sits in the driveway. Another upgrade cycle passes, and somewhere, someone who could afford the SUV 3 times over makes a cup of coffee, looks out the window, and feels something that's becoming increasingly rare in modern life. Completely, unremarkably, enough. So tell me something. Is there an upgrade in your life right now that you're pursuing? And somewhere underneath it, you're not entirely sure it's yours? Drop it in the comments, not to be judged. Just to be honest for a second. And if this video gave you something worth keeping, you know where the subscribe button is.